Hi, I'm Alicia, and welcome to my channel Papercraft Secrets. Today I am sharing an album that I created with the Mintay Life Stories collection by Corolla. This memory book has a collection of memories in it in chronological order and decorated beautifully with the Life Stories collection. So this is a little flip through of the album. I purchased the actual book from Officeworks and I decorated the pages in the book, and then I just ripped the pages that I didn't need out of the book at the end. So you can see here how I have stuck to the one collection of papers and the same stamps throughout the album to keep the consistency. I've kept some pages very simple, and I actually like the simpler pages the best. So this album is a book about friendship between two ladies, and it has photos from their childhood right up to the present day, and one of the ladies is giving it to the other. So it's just a lovely gift to say how special their relationship is and how blessed they feel to have each other as friends in this life. So this is what the album's about. So it's a journey of their lives, and it has photos from when they were very small right up to the present day. So it really is a collection of memories, of a lifetime of memories. I've given it a distressed sort of feel to the album and a bit of a mixed media feel, like I've used quite a bit of stamping in the album and a lot of fussy cutting. But you can see each page follows the same sketch layout or very similar sort of layout so that the album could be completed fairly quickly. And I'm going to take you step by step through exactly how I created the album, and so you can create it something similar yourself at home if you would like to. So let's get started. To begin with, I started with the photographs that I received. I printed some of them out as a 3x4 image, and I printed some others out as a 6x4 image. Once I had my photos printed, I chose my paper, and I chose the Life Stories paper by Mintay. It's got a lot of natural colours. This was the album that I bought at Officeworks. It's just a blank album. I wanted something that was already created that I could just use and pop my photos straight into. These are the frames that I've cut from the number 6 paper of Life Stories. I like to use these frames as a border for photographs. So I went through, and once I had fussy cut the frames from the number 6 page, I went through and pasted them on to all of my photographs that would fit to this size. Then I started planning my album in terms of the order of the photographs. I needed to know what was going to go on which page. So I actually used paper clips to just sort of hold my photos in place on the pages so that they stayed in position and I knew what I was doing. So just sort of roughly decided on what photos would go with which, and I planned everything out first. Because the pages are already secured in the album, that means that there's no way that I can change my mind if I wanted to down the track. So I had to be certain that I knew what order I wanted my photographs in. Once I had the order of photographs sorted, I knew how many pages that I would need to decorate. And so this was an important step in planning my album, and it made the process a lot easier because I already had each photograph picked for each page. My next step was to cut some paper. I made some large rectangles which were 9.5 by 3 inches, and this is them here, 9.5 that way by 3 that way, and then the thin rectangles were 8 inches by 1.25 inches. So I went through and cut enough of those rectangles for each of my pages that I needed. And the papers in this beautiful collection are amazing. They've got a very vintage feel to them. They've got sort of like a little bit of an old-fashioned feel to them. I felt these papers represented my album quite nicely. Just cutting up those larger rectangles and then the smaller rectangles. My next step was to ink the edges of all of these rectangles to add that dark brown vintage look to the edges of each of the papers. My next step was to begin to paste some of these papers into my album. And I kept a very, very simple layout design for each of the pages. I put the large rectangle close to the edge of the paper, and then I overlapped the skinny rectangle on top of that. Sometimes I did the rectangles close to the inside of the album, and sometimes it was close to the outside of the page. So I alternated that a little bit, but I just kept the design very simple, and that made creating a large album quite easy. So let's move to the next page. Now this page had some large photographs on it, some 4x6 sizes, and it turned out to be one of the busiest spreads in the album. Just gluing on the paper, the large rectangles on the outer edges of the page. And we're going to add some small rectangles overlapping our larger rectangles. And we repeat this exact same design on every single page of the album. It showcases the papers really nicely. It also showcases the photographs. So on this one, putting them on the inside of the page. The large rectangle going in. And then overlapping that large rectangle, the smaller rectangle. very simple design. And so I continued on throughout the whole book until I had enough layouts completed for all of the photos in my album. My next stage was I needed to make a few photo mats for some of the larger photos and some of the photos that didn't fit well into those little frames. So I took a piece of paper from the Life Stories collection and I cut it into 6x4 rectangles so that I could use that as photo mats. Once I had that photograph glued onto the photo mat, then I was ready to pop it into the album. I used some paper doilies in this album, and I had all my floral clusters already cut so that I could use them quickly and easily in my layouts. I also had some stamps that I wanted to use in the album. This is like a vintage script sort of stamp, background stamp that just adds some vintage writing to the page. I absolutely love that stamp. It's one of my favorite stamps. Just adding my little doily on and my fussy cut floral clusters, inking the edges of the page to give it more of a distressed look. Once I was happy with my design, I started to glue everything down. I went through my stamp collection and found some mixed media style background stamps that I could use in this album. I wanted to add a little bit of texture and a little bit of mixed media to my pages. I also stamped some sentiments as well. Moving on to the next page now. I mounted these photos with the black paper from the collection. I wanted to use this flower stamp to add some texture to the pages. And it's similar to the floral clusters that I was using from the paper collection, so I felt that it suited the pages quite well. I just wanted to get a little bit of ink on the page. Because it's such a plain background, I wanted to decorate it a little bit with some mixed media stamping. I also added some black cotton thread to my flowers to create a little bit of texture to the layout, but everything else was kept very flat. I didn't use any double-sided tape or any recycled cardboard in this album because I wanted the pages to be flat for the book. I repeated the same process on this side with the black paper as a photo mat. In hindsight, I wouldn't have popped these two photos on the one page because it became a very busy layout, which I was trying to go for sort of a more clean and simple look. So because both of those photos are quite big, they take up quite a bit of the page. And they're very busy photos, like there's a lot going on in the photograph, so I just felt at the end of when I'd finished creating the book that these pages were a bit too busy. So I just used a doily to stick down and then pasted down the photos. And then I just used a floral cluster to decorate. So the floral clusters are the best decoration. They're just so easy. Once you've got them cut out, they're ready to go. Just a little bit of stamping. Moving on now to the next layout. I've got these photos. These are actually the same photo, but one's enlarged and one's small. So I'm going to use those together. I'm going to add a doily to this page. And I'm going to use this rose stamp again. So just positioned it in a circle around the doily basically. Then I used a big floral cluster to decorate the page. If you cut your doily in half, you can make it go a little bit further. And then I'll have my two photographs on a diagonal, adding in a little bit more floral cluster. And that's that page completed. Just add a little sentiment down the bottom. Moving on to the next page now. Just starting with some ink around the edges of the page. Got another two photographs for this page. I'm going to use some of that vintage script stamp. That sort of just gives it more of a vintage feel. A little bit of mixed media stamping. Pop a doily in. I'm going to put those photos, one slightly overlapping the other. Add a floral cluster. That's a really pretty floral cluster. There's another one there we can add in. We'll glue that doily down. Put that one on top. We're going to glue the photographs down now, and we'll add in a little bit of that black cotton thread. I'm going to add a little sentiment there at the bottom. Thank you for your friendship. and a butterfly there. Moving on to the next layout now. Got 2 photos on one side. Going to add in some floral clusters underneath the doily and photographs on this side of the page. And perhaps a clock. I think I might do some stamping as well on this side, just to carry the pattern of the flowers out onto the page. Add some vintage writing, give it that distressed sort of feel. Stick those photos on. And add a sentiment down the bottom. Just going to add a little bit of stamping to this side of the page. I've got 2 photographs on this page to decorate with. I found some floral clusters that I wanted to add, one to the top and one to the bottom of the photographs. So I'll glue those down. You can add a doily in as well if you want to. You don't have to. Glue both of those down. And I'm just going to add a sentiment down the bottom there. So very thankful. Perhaps another little floral cluster just there at the side. Yep, and that looks good. Maybe a little bit more of this vintage ink. Balance the page out a little bit. And that's that layout done. Moving on to the next layout now. Some photos. One photo needs to be layered onto some paper. The rest all fit into their little frames. Inking the edges. And just playing around with the possibility of a doily or some floral clusters. Just a floral cluster up here. A floral cluster in the middle here, and then the 2 photographs basically are the real focal point for this page. They're very pretty. Pop them in there. Just finding some more little floral clusters for this side of the layout now. One down at the bottom, one at the top. Just adding in a floral cluster at the top of that photo there. And one at the bottom. Let's glue our photo down. Adding some more stamping. The top and the bottom. Adding a sentiment stamp at the bottom of the picture. Down the bottom there. A little bit of ink on the other side of the page, inking all the edges, and that's those layouts finished. Moving on to the next double page spread now. We've got 4 photographs. Some of them are in frames, others have been mounted onto the black paper. Going to be using some floral clusters to decorate the page, going for a diagonal cluster sort of look. And a mirror image on the pages. Just adding on a few little embellishments here from the fancy fussy cutting sheet. Just like a little clock and a door. And a door hinge, just to add a few little fussy cut elements that are a little bit different from just the floral clusters. And I really like the door hinges, they're really pretty. They add a nice solid piece to the papers. Inking the edges always adds a nice feel to it. It just sort of takes off any of those white little fussy cut edges. Just blends it into the page better. And a sentiment perhaps. Incredibly grateful. Butterfly here and there. Moving on to the next page. Got 3 photographs on this page, 2 on one side and 1 on the other. Going to add in some floral clusters. Gluing on the photographs. Gluing on the floral clusters. I really like how those floral clusters sit on that craft background paper. Adding a few little sentiments, a little bit of stamping. Moving on to another layout now. 1 photo on one side, 2 photos on the other side. Using a paper doily on this side and a floral cluster. I'm going to glue that down. It's a nice, quick, easy layout. And a sentiment. Inking around the edges of the other photographs now. Adding a paper doily and a floral cluster. I'm just going to glue that down now. Adding in the paper doily, the floral cluster, the photographs. Adding in a sentiment and a little flower on that. A little bit of script and that page will be done. Oh, I put in one of those little hinges. I love those. Moving on to the next layout. 1 photo on one side, 2 photos on the other side. I added in a little bit of extra paper on this one. That was a little scrap. I'm going to add a little bit of stamping as well. And a doily maybe. Maybe not. Maybe. You don't see a lot of it, do you? Just a little bit poking out, but that's still nice. Just a little bit of lace. Pop a sentiment on. Moving on to the opposite page, 2 photographs, a floral cluster, and I'm going to pop a clock there in the middle. A little bit of paper down there. Moving on to the next page. 2 photos on one side, 1 photo on the other, big floral cluster. A little bit of stamping. A sentiment. Moving on to the last page. Now this is actually the last page in the book now. And some floral clusters under the photograph. A little bingo card. Sticking the photo down. And because that's the last page in the book, I'm actually going to tear out the remaining pages. And then I'm working on the front cover now. I wanted the front cover to be very flat so that it can sit on a bookshelf. The front cover already has a rainbow design and some words down the bottom. I think it's Create Your Own Happiness. I didn't find the sentiment Create Your Own Happiness appropriate for the album, but I did like the word happiness, so I chose to keep that as the title for the album, but I covered up the Create Your Own, and I covered up the rainbow as well because the rainbow wasn't in style with the album. I chose this photo because it's one of my favorite photos to go on the front cover. And basically I'm just using scraps of paper to cover over that rainbow. Adding another little section in there. Just inking the edges and then gluing that on there. Just balance the design a little bit. It's sort of like a block pattern design. I'm going to add this floral cluster in there. Put a little clock in there. And then my photograph directly on top. Now I did have some butterflies picked out from the wing book, so I'm going to go through and see if I can add any butterflies in to the album where they might suit. I also used some sticker sentiment sheets by Mintay to add a couple of sentiments to my album pictures. I do like to have some words on each page because I think it gives the eye something to do when it gets there. Gives it something to read. I inked the edges of the sentiments too, just to give them a little bit more of a vintage feel. Then I went over the pages and gave them a little bit of a spritz with some vintage misting spray. And just to finish, a little walk through the album so you can see the finished product. It fits really nicely within the spiral bounding because I took out all of those extra pages, so it feels like a completed book. Different memories on each page, and the photos are in chronological order. And there's the last page of the book. And so that is the completed album. I'm really happy with how it turned out, and the lady that I made it for is really, really happy with it. She's giving it to her special friend as a gift. So I'm yet to hear how the friend likes the book. It's nice to have all of the memories in one album and in one place to look over. And that's the completed album. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope that it inspires you to get a certain amount of your photos out and put them together in an album and either keep it for yourself or give it to a friend as a gift. The Mintay papers are perfect for creating beautiful memorabilia books like this. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for watching and have a lovely crafty day.